I like drawing. I also like learning about other cultures. Slap those two together, and we got a series where I learn about the different cultures of the world and draw creatures based on them. Revolutionary, I know. To give a bit more direction on this series, I'm focusing specifically on the entertainment of these cultures. Let's be honest, the world has seen better days, and I think it's getting easier and easier to overlook the joys in life. I want this series to be an excuse about learning about the different places in the world and learn how people entertain themselves, how they be happy. A lot of online artists make their own Pokemon designs inspired by specific cultures of the world. They usually use the term Fakemon. Now, I'll probably be using that term here because it helps explain what I'm doing a bit better, but Fakemon implies that these could exist alongside official Pokemon, A lot of Fakemon artists pride themselves on recreating the Pokemon style as accurately as possible. I don't fit in that category. I'm not trying to replicate Pokemon style or claim these as anything close to being Pokemon. This is clearly going to be a Pokemon-inspired thing, but it's going to exist in its own world, I feel like I'm already overthinking it. This is just an excuse to draw silly creatures based on cultures of the world. Having said all of that, let's start with the starters. Each Pokemon game has its own set of starters that always help establish the themes of their respective game. The first generation of starters establish what Pokemon is, animals with elemental powers. The second generation of starters all have bright, vibrant colours, since it was the first games that could be played on a Game Boy Color. And Sword and Shield starters all have really large heads, a perfect fit for a region based on England. So, if we're making a region based on what makes people happy around the world, what would our starters be? Without sounding too preachy, I think it was really important for me to establish these starters as inclusive, that's the right word, as possible. As much as I want this region to encapsulate the idea of the world coming together to create something vibrant and fun, each culture is drastically different, and that goes for what they find entertaining and worth celebrating. What one culture enjoys, another might find offensive, right? Now, in future videos, when we get to specific cultures, we'll discuss specifically what they enjoy and make a creature based on that. But for the starters, I really wanted to make sure that they all represented something that, no matter where you're from or who you are, you could agree that it was worth being happy about. The original idea was food, but as the ideas developed, they kind of became something very different, so we'll save the food idea for another day. For now though, we'll start with the first starter I drew, and the first one I had an idea for. The fire starter. So, what can every human agree what is worth celebrating, what is also related to fire? Easy. Turtles. The original idea back when I was still focused on food was the idea of something related to a birthday cake. But as the idea developed, I had to kind of get rid of the birthday symbology because obviously there's some cultures what don't really celebrate birthdays. I understand the thought process of changing your design out of risk because somebody might find it offensive. I'm not doing that per se here. It's like I mentioned earlier, these three starters are meant to encapsulate something that literally anybody around the world can agree is worth celebrating. So it was important that, I guess I made them a bit generic as possible to make them accessible to everybody, If somebody from a culture who doesn't celebrate birthdays likes this creature who is based on a birthday cake, it does run that slight risk of them feeling guilty for liking a design. It's a bit of a sticky subject when making creatures based around the entirety of the world, but for these three starters, I wanted it to be that no matter who you are or where you're from, you can enjoy these starters free of charge, So I wanted to kind of go a bit more general with the theming. Instead of making it based on a birthday cake, I just went with, the idea what inspired the birthday cake idea in the first place. Life. Unless you're a 14-year-old emo guy, life is worth celebrating, right? No matter what. You're alive, and I think that's incredibly special, and we should all be happy about that. I made life the fire starter because I think candles represent life pretty well, how a candle won't last forever, but that doesn't mean a candle isn't special. Combining that with a turtle, or tortoise, only seemed fitting, the animals live for thousands of years. That's an exaggeration. So mixing them together as a tortoise with a long burning candle on its shell, what was, burning for as long as it's alive, so hundreds of years, I think that's an interesting idea. This is also a redemption design in a way. Several years ago, I made these three Fakemon starters. Hopefully I've gotten slightly better in that time. However, there was something about the fire starter I really enjoyed. There is just something about the imagery of candles I really appreciate. Like I mentioned earlier, the beauty of how nice a candle can be, but how, in a very literal sense, you can't keep one forever, Now that creature design ended up evolving into a character design, Wick. But for the longest time, I have always wanted to kind of go back to that Fakemon design and remake a true Candle Fakemon, what represented the things what Wick does. So here is Tortive, a mix between tortoise and a votive candle. A votive means small candle, basically. Now, I've not drawn pixel art in a very long time, so I hope it turned out cute, and I hope you all liked it. We'll get to its evolution soon enough, but first I wanted to introduce the two other starters first. So let's move on to the water starter. So, back when I was doing the food idea, water seemed quite easy. Water. But as I moved further and further from the food idea, I kind of wanted to delve into deeper as to what water really represents. Us. We're water. We're a lot of water. We're like, what, 60 to 70% made of water? That's a lot. And if the fire starter is based on life, it kind of seemed fitting to make the water starter based on body. Us, who we physically are. I feel like no matter who you are, the fact that you can look down at yourself and see that you are, you exist. I know it being your life, you would have gotten used to it, but the fact that you do exist is special. It's only now I'm realizing how cheesy and pandering I'm sounding, but it's true. So we've got the representation. What about the actual design? Well, water being us, that link was there, but making a physical design seemed a bit weird because, a lot of our water is our blood, and making a blood starter, I'm not against it, but I don't think it would fit this type of region specifically. So I went with an animal known for having a very large body. I'm not going to make a Yo Mama joke. No, you can obviously see it's an elephant. The idea of elephants having a connection with water is also very obvious. Elephants are surprisingly very good swimmers despite their size. And the imagery of an elephant schlorking up water into its trunk and squirting it everywhere, that's a really common imagery. Most of the time when people do make Fakemon based off elephants, they are usually water types. I mean, over the years, I've made about 4 elephant designs, and 75% of them are at least part water. I kind of wanted to take it into a bit of a new direction though. I didn't want to just go with an elephant, I also wanted to include the imagery of whales. Again, for the similar reason why I chose elephant, just a really large physical creature, something that can really have an impact on the landscape around it. A whale is pretty big. Same thing for an elephant on land. Again, this is meant to represent the fact that you are physically on this planet and you can have an impact the same way those giant creatures can as well. So combining those two into a slight chimera seemed fitting. I also gave it cute little water bubble ears, because that way its head looks like a water molecule. I thought that was cute. So yes, here is Soakafin, a mix between soak, calf, a baby elephant, and fin. I will 100% admit I'm more of a drawer than a name thinker of it. The names are literally the very last thing I think of, so I'm definitely open to thinking of a better one in the future, or even if you can think of a better one, feel free to let me know. And as much as I'm happy with the Firestarter's pixel art, I feel like I struggled a bit on this one. Elephants, at least to me, are surprisingly difficult to draw. I really struggle with perspective and drawing anatomy in creatures, so making an elephant look decent, especially with a small sprite, I kind of struggled with, but hey, I hope you liked it either way. Let's get on to the grass starter. Now, normally, most Fakemon videos typically do the grass starter first, then the fire, then the water. I've done mine entirely out of order. I mostly talked about them just in order of when I designed them. I designed the fire starter first, then the water, and the grass the very last. Bars. Now, the grass is the main reason the food idea kind of fell apart, because I really struggled to think of a food-related mon to do with plants, at least in the concept of, like, what's worth celebrating, Like, I could have just made a lettuce with googly eyes, but why are we celebrating that, And even now, I did still struggle on it the most out of all 3 starters. However, eventually the idea came to me. The grass starter represents the choices we make in our lives, and mentally speaking, who we are. If the water starter kind of represents our physical impact, the grass represents the mental impact, our decisions, our thought processes, who we are, I wanted this creature to be really colourful. I made the water starter kind of just one colour on purpose, almost a contrast to the grass starter. If the grass starter represents our mental ability, I also wanted it to represent creativity and change. As much as our physical bodies grow and change, for the most part, physically, we are what we are. It's mostly our mental selves, our brains, what do the most changing and expression over time. you know? So the animal to represent that seemed quite easy to me. A chameleon, an animal known for changing its colours constantly. But I specifically wanted to go a little bit abstract. I didn't want to go full chameleon. I wanted to go almost with this combination of several other lizard-like creatures like geckos and iguanas. Mostly because I'm really bad at drawing chameleons, but also because, again, if this is meant to represent our mental state, I think the idea of going for a more abstract, not necessarily specifically physically real creature makes the most sense. And I think it works especially as a great contrast to the other two starters. The water starter being based on our physicality, our bodies, having two creatures, both combined to make something fictional, yes, but the very obvious clear body of an elephant with a whale tail. Two very obvious, impactful things making a creature, you know? And the fire starter being based on time, something we do understand, and for all intents and purposes is real, allowing the creature to be very clearly a tortoise. Its waxy body is still very malleable. It's still clearly a creature, but a lot more fantastical than the elephant, because time as a concept is quite hard to fully, truly comprehend. And then we have the grass starter, something what is literally comprehension itself, the brain, the actual mental state, the creativity, the expression, the change. I like that all three starters do have a different level of realism, you know, the tortoise, yes, being a clear tortoise, but having a body made out of goopy wax. The elephant being mostly just an elephant with a whale tail, and then this gecko thing, what isn't, you know, it's clearly inspired by different creatures, but itself is very clearly abstract. I'm struggling to find the words for it, but I hope you can understand what I'm saying here. Either way, rambling aside, here is Bugaboo, a mix between bug and bloom. And, well, I think it's just a funny little name. Again, abstract. Bug coming from the idea, well, you know, bugs and flowers have a relation, obviously, and also the fact that, you know, bugs, like caterpillars, go through metamorphosis, literal changing, you know, and that's the kind of vibe what I wanted this creature to represent as well. It's also why I gave him little antenna. So yeah, here are our three starters. I sincerely hope you all like them. Let me know which ones you like and which ones you don't like, but we are far from done with this video because, well, we gotta evolve them. Starting with Tortive. I'm gonna try and quick fire the middle stage evolutions because I don't want these videos to be too long. So, if the first form, Tortive, is meant to represent the beginning of life, you know, a small little fire, an ember, if you will, I wanted the middle evolution to kind of be the exact opposite. Too much fire, constantly going, constantly burning. Not like burning out per se, just, you know, you don't have an off switch. That hunger when you're at that part in your life where you just want to keep getting more and more and more. That's what I wanted this guy to represent. The joy in life. The fire of life, you know? I also gave it extra horns and made its tail a bit spikier, made its legs way lankier. Again, because the idea is that they're growing up, you know? I really like the cute little rock decorations Tortive had. Again, that was subtly meant to at least give the idea of a birthday cake without it actually being one. It was also just kind of meant to represent the idea that when a Tortive is born, its parents give it specific markings on its shell so it could, you know, its parents could recognize that that Tortive is theirs. Because, you know, it's a little baby, it needs its parents to recognise it so it can look after it. Here, though, the evolution, I like the idea that the fire has gotten so out of control and on fire, it's burnt those markings off. It's forging its own path. You can't tame time, you know? I think that works as the rebellious middle stage of like, I don't need my parents to look after me, I'm my own little guy. Here is Thermoise, a mix between thermal, tortoise, and it sounds like furnace. Now let's go on to the third form. I was a little bit stuck between whether doing all the middle stage ones first, but whilst we're on the subject of discussing what time represents and everything, it just made sense to just continue the theme with this final design. So we've got the first form, what represents the start of life, the middle form, what represents the fire and non-stop thrill of life. The final form just represents a life well lived. Not angry or fierce like the middle form, just this passive, gentle giant. What, in a way, that's what time is itself. I understand that it's really easy to vilify time, but I think for the same reasons you could vilify it, you could also express infinite gratitude. Yes, a lot of bad things happen in time, but so many good things happen as well. And for the sake of this series, we're going to be focusing on the good side of time. Again, this gentle giant, what simply moves things forward. Because that's what time is. It's always forward. Design-wise, there's nothing too insane. It is just a giant fire candle turtle thing. I like the idea of making its colours a lot calmer like the first form. Again, the fire isn't out, it's just simmered a lot more. It doesn't need that excitement or that thrill anymore, it's lived a good life and it's happy to just take it slow from now on. The middle form had a few concepts taken from the snapping turtle, which is why I made it, you know, have horns and a sharp looking teeth. I like the idea that the final form, although it has a front horn still, it loses the back one. Again, it kind of makes it look a bit more like an older man, which I think kind of suits it. It makes it look a lot more passive and humble. This thing, you know, it'll fight to defend itself, sure, but it doesn't need to look cool or boisterous or anything. It's happy with where it's at. I struggled a bit designing the shell because now it doesn't have any markings and there's no fire going through it. It felt like it had a lot of dead space. I like the idea of having like solidified magma on top. I don't know, I feel like that kind of gives the idea that it once was so blazing hot, but it is still really hot, but just a lot cooler in comparison, you know? And I also like the idea of smoke coming out of its shell, but recreates the same stripes it had when it was a baby. That message, what I said earlier, that you can't tame time, you know, everything you do, it's so easy to be so pessimistic and say everything you do in time will be forgotten. Sure, the physical things you left might be forgotten, like the markings, but the impact and what they represent, they can last so much longer than you might even ever realise. And I think that gets represented nicely here with the smoke coming out in the same way as it was a baby. I'm repeating myself. Here we have Torchagos, a mix between torch, tortoise, and Galapagos. Galapagos? The Galapagos tortoise, which is just a giant tortoise, you know, which is what this is. It's a big old turtle. I hope you enjoy the fire line and what it represents. A life well lived and time well spent, you know? Now let's do the water evolutions. I feel like I am ordering these in a really weird way, but we're already doing it now. So, Sokafin is a really simple baby elephant with a whale tail, you know. Thinking of what I could evolve it into was surprisingly tricky because I feel like it already is what it is. And it's such an easy insult to Fakemon, you know, when it said like, oh, the evolution is just, it gets bigger. You know, it's such an easy thing to throw out. And I wanted to avoid that. So I went on my fun fact machine and learned a fun fact about whales. They are the loudest animals in the planet. Their clicks, what they use for echolocation in the ocean, can be louder than jet engines, which is kind of insane. And when you think about elephants, I feel like the main thing you think about is their trunk and their very iconic noise. I'm a great animal impressionist. It made sense to me to make the evolution more sound-based than just the physical impact. Again, sound can still represent largeness, physicality, you know, in a way you can feel sound. And that's what I wanted this guy to represent. I also just wanted to mention my philosophy when designing these starter evolutions. In modern day Pokemon, the starter evolutions vary very differently to their starting form. Sobble looks very different to Inteleon, Litten looks very different to Incineroar. Yes, there's still a few parts of their design what do link them as evolutions, but just as a design they do look very strikingly different conceptually and physically. And I don't have a problem with that necessarily, I just also at the same time really like how the older starters were. Like the Generation 2 starters I really like because in a way, they are really simple. They are just a baby, what grows up into an adult. There's no crazy bells or whistles or new design element what gets implemented as the stage progresses, it's just a really simple but effective design across all three starters. And I kind of wanted to go with that philosophy, just in case anybody was wondering why these evolutions seem a little bit on the basic side. It's kind of on purpose. Here is Trunkit. You know, a mix between trumpet and trunk. Because, you know, it's more focused on the loud noises it makes with its trumpet trunk. Now on to the third form. So, with this stage kind of representing physicalness and the body, the third form, again similar to the time one, where it's just a proud final stage of, yes, it just represents just a proud physical presence. And the only problem with that design-wise is just, well, as an elephant, I feel like its powerful presence is just the fact that it exists. An elephant doesn't need to have a unique design or pose because if you're standing next to an elephant, you're gonna feel its presence, you know? So in the sense of this being a drawing, it was kind of tricky to come up with a design what also shows off that impactful nature. you know? So I kind of wanted to go just towards more the gentle giant nature, which I think suits water as well. Water as a concept is this very powerful and can be deadly, but also this necessary nurturing concept we need for life, you know? I didn't talk about it with Trunket, but I really like how I developed the ears to be like these splashy, watery waves. And for the third form, I kind of wanted to just make them a bit more fierce, because again, it's the final form here. In hindsight, my pixel art kind of weirdly makes it look a bit too spiky, but what can you do? I also noticed, whilst looking at whales, that they all have this really small back fin. I included it in Trunket's design, and here I like the idea that that implements into just a bunch of constantly moving and rotating spikes along the back. Well, not spikes, but like fins, what create the idea of just roaring and crashing waves on its back. I guess saying it's a bunch of spinal plates rotating and moving sounds a bit gruesome, so maybe it is just literal crashing foamy waves on its back. To be entirely honest, other than the watery ears, I did kind of struggle to think of something what really made this creature fantastical other than the whale tail and water ears. So I feel like giving it this like crashy, watery foam on its back kind of gives it that little, just that fantastical boost. I wonder in hindsight if I should have made that motif a bit more clearer throughout the entire design, like maybe covered the whole body in foamy waves. I'm not entirely sure. You'll have to let me know what you think. As proud as I am of the waterline, I think it's definitely the one what would probably need the most work if I, redesigned them. The same with the colour. I really like the vibrant colour of Trunket, and I feel like I tried to numb it down a little bit for the sake of, I don't know, looking more like clear water, and I don't necessarily know if that was the right decision to do. Especially because the foamy white waves look a bit like ice when they're meant to be, again, not necessarily sharp, but I think that's another problem with pixel art as well. I also at least like the idea that its trunk has like these like water lines as if the entire thing is this constantly moving and waving water stream. I kind of liked that idea. I do like this line, I just think it kind of lacks that final thing what I think the grass and fire lines have. But again, like I said, you'll have to let me know, and I am happy for what it is. Here is El Aqua. I was actually spending a lot of time trying to think of a unique name for a water elephant whale thing, and I think El Aqua just has a nice, simple beauty to it, you know? Elephant and aqua, obviously. I hope you like the waterline and what it represents. The idea of having a physical impact, which admittedly in its design itself doesn't necessarily come out that much other than the fact that it is just a large creature. But again, at least for what it is, I am happy with it. And I hope you are too. Now on to the final line, the grass line. So, Bugaboo as a creature is very paint related. I like the idea that it lives in dense, tropical jungles, perchance, with lots of variety and different flowers that it likes to mush about and make paint what it covers on its body. And it has this weird plant on its tail thing what creates like purple paint. Again, this creature is meant to represent creativity and self-expression, so the idea of it having a plant paint thing, I kind of like it. The evolution here is simply just more of that. More self-expression, more plant, more purple, more yay. Again, it's like the other middle forms. They're just meant to be bigger and cooler. The vibe I wanted to go for is the first forms looking like the babies, the middle forms looking like the cooler older sibling, with the third form looking like the parent. You know, I really liked that idea of having that dynamic between my starters. If the fire evolution is meant to be the cool older brother, and the water starter is like the still cooler and older but more gentler older sister, the grass starter is meant to be the weirdo older brother who you like to hang out with because he's always funny, you know? I also like the idea that the antenna specifically grows into a bulb on its head. Again, constantly changing. I didn't want to keep the antenna motif throughout the design. I knew that when I first made it. That was on purpose because, again, the entire line is meant to be a little bit abstract and mostly focused on change. Which is also why each evolution has different paint blobs all over its body, you know. So here we have Foliazard, a mix between foliage and lizard. I really like the pose this guy's in, and yeah, I really like the personality this guy has. And I also like how he's got a bit of crocodile in there. Again, very abstract with just a bunch of different lizards thrown in there and mashed up, you know. I really like that. Now on to the third form, Again, my apologies if I'm kind of speeding through all these. I didn't want to do all 9 in one video. I was thinking of doing 3 smaller videos, each focusing on each starter, but then I kind of thought, nah, we'll just do one, since I've got all the designs and everything anyway. Future videos won't be nearly as this long, as I'll only really focus on 1 or 2 lines per episode, but either way, I'm rambling, which is making the episode even longer. And in all fairness, there's not really that much to talk about with this design. It is simply the final stage of the grass line, where the bulb on the lizard's head has now plumed into a lovely purple flower. It's got a lovely flower bush where it grows on its back, where it can make its own paint dye, and also hide its children in. I think that's a cute little idea. In its concept sketch, I was going to include a tongue, but in pixel art, it was I felt like that cluttered the sprite too much, so although I imagine it's got a bright blue tongue or something, it probably keeps that, in the sprite. I guess I'll ask for your guys' opinion on the idea of making these evolutions simpler concept-wise, where it's not just getting bigger, but at the same time, the concept is just the same throughout the entire line. I'm curious as to what you think about that. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but there is clearly a difference between, Charmander to Charizard and Tepig to Emboar, I do think both have a merits. A Fakemon region I made years ago had a Cactus Ball what evolved into a Cactus Boxer. So getting to make these starters are a lot more simpler, and the fact that this entire series was just made for a bit of fun and to learn some fun facts. I think for the 3 designs what really aren't inspired by any culture and are based on very open concept about what life's about, the one episode where I can't really include fun facts or things like that inside, I think they get the job done well enough. But again, you'll have to let me know what you think. Here is Neselion. A mix between Nectar, Nettle, and Chameleon. Again, I really like how this guy came out. I surprised myself. I wasn't expecting it to come out not this bad. And I hope you like the entire grass line. Again, just the idea of just self-expressing yourself with, yourself. The idea that this creature paints and expresses itself. The fact that its body is constantly changing by putting different paint blotches on itself. I really like that. And I hope you like all 3 starters. I'm really happy how I implemented, what they represent. Moving forward, I want this region to focus on other cultures and, more specifically, what makes people happy around the world, So having these starters be just the most fundamental basic of why you should be happy in the first place. The fact that you have a life, you have a body, you have yourself, That's what these 3 represent. The time you spend being alive, the body you have being alive, and just who you are in the first place. Your time, your body, yourself. Again, I'm saying the same thing just in different ways, but hopefully that gets the point across. I understand concepts as broad as reality and life as you know it is kind of difficult to come across, so I hope I did a good enough job putting it into these 3 designs. I wouldn't say it's necessarily obvious. I don't think looking at the elephant you would guess it's meant to be based on your body, or looking at the turtle it's necessarily based on time. But sometimes, when something represents something, you can just be happy with the finished result without really worrying about what inspired it, And I do apologise that this episode didn't really have a lot of fun facts or culture exploring. Again, we're setting the basics here with getting just 3 starters what hopefully everybody has in common, which we do. We all have a life, a body, and ourselves. I'm repeating myself yet again. Hopefully you'll join me in the next episode where we'll finally look into a culture and make a fun, unique design. I hope you like the region as a whole, feel free to let me know what you think, and I hope you like the starters. Again, I've not really drawn pixel art, let alone designs like these in a while, so any feedback or what you think would be really well appreciated. And I'm also curious to know what starter you would pick. I can't imagine this world would necessarily be like Pokemon where you pick monsters and you fight with them, but at the very least, if you could have one as a pet, which one would you have? Maybe not a pet actually, because I don't think a turtle being on fire is a pet I would want. But either way, this video was 30 minutes when I originally only wanted it to be 10. I'm going to stop talking. I hope you liked the video, let me know what you think of this format. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, or if you're off to bed, have the sweetest of dreams, and I will see you all in a bit. Toodaloo! Bye!